The men started the conflict. The verdict is about to be read. Let's listen in.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Madam Foreperson, I understand you have reached a verdict as to each defendant.
We have, Your Honor.
Please hand your verdict forms to the sheriff. All right. I'm going to go ahead and address each one of these verdict forms separately. The first verdict form I have is the State of Georgia versus Travis McMichael. Mr. McMichael, please stand. Verdict is as follows. In the Superior Court of Glenn County, State of Georgia, the State of Georgia versus Travis McMichael, case number CR 000433. Jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. I'm going to ask that whoever just made an outburst be removed from the court, please. As this court has indicated, I ask that there be no outbursts in the court, and I expect as much from the gallery. Please respect the court's desire for this as we move forward. If you feel like you need to make a comment or otherwise demonstrate with respect to the verdict, I do ask that you step out of the courtroom now. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Dated this 24th day of November, 2021, signed by the foreperson. Have a seat. As to Gregory McMichael. In the Superior Court of Glenn County, the State of Georgia versus Greg McMichael, case number CR 2000433. Jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, not guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. This 24th day of November, 2021, signed by the foreperson. As to William R. Bryan. In the Superior Court of Glenn County, State of Georgia versus William R. Bryan, case number CR 2000433, jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Signed this 24th day of November by the foreperson. Go ahead and have a seat. Court having read the verdicts and accepted the verdicts, anything from the state?
No, Your Honor, nothing from the state.
Anything from the defense?
We ask the jury be polled, Your Honor.
All defendants ask the jury be polled? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask each of you individually a set of 2 questions with respect to the verdicts that I have just read. If you could please respond when you hear your juror number. Juror number 1, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, sir.
Juror number 2, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, sir.
I can't. Okay, 2. Juror number 3, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes.
Juror number 4, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, sir.
Juror number 5, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 7, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 8, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 9, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 10, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 11, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 12, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, Your Honor.
And juror 16, you have heard the verdicts read. Were these your verdicts then, and are these your verdicts now?
Yes, sir.
The jury has been polled. Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
From Greg McMichael.
No, Your Honor.
From Mr. Bryan.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, what that means with the court having accepted your verdict is that your role in this case is now at an end. What we're going to do today is I'm going to have all of you, the panel and the 3 alternates, go ahead and retire into the jury room. I'm going to address a couple matters logistically with you in the jury room once we get done here. But before we do that, and before I excuse you, I do want to thank you publicly for your service here in Glenn County. It has been a long trial, and I appreciate the fact that you have been attentive. You've listened to the evidence, and that is what we ask in this court. It's a very simple ask in a very complex way. So it's appreciated. When we all got together, I say we all got together, when we got together at different times, I said that I was going to thank you a number of times and how I was going to tell you I do truly appreciate your time here. Hopefully you understand why I said that when we started. I do also hope that you got a little bit of an insight into what goes on in a trial and maybe understand a little bit more of how important it is for members of our community to come down and be part of this process and serve as jurors in this community. So again, thank you for that service. And I'll come address you all in just a moment. You are excused.
All right, for the jury.
Mike.
We've just heard the verdict in the Ahmaud Arbery case, also the polling of the jury, and now we're going to CBS's Omar Villafranca, who is outside the courthouse in Brunswick, Georgia. He has been following this case, along with his producer, Roddie Hawkins, from the very beginning, from the spring of 2020. Omar, what's the reaction outside the courthouse, and what stands out to you about this verdict?
Well, Catherine, we were outside just courthouse right there behind me, and the second we heard malice murder, there was a slight delay when they were reading Travis McMichael, and there was a very, very loud yell, people cheering. They wanted to hear that Travis McMichael, the man who was accused of pulling the trigger and found guilty of murder, they wanted to hear that he was guilty of malice murder. Interesting note, I'm going through some of the my sheets here. His father, Gregory McMichael, not guilty, as we heard there. That was a bit of a surprise. People there were kind of didn't know how to react, but he was found guilty of the felony murder counts and the rest, aggravated assault, false imprisonment. What's interesting is that now, from what we understand, we just heard the judge, he's dismissing the jury, which means the judge is now going to issue out whatever sentence is. Now, malice murder, it basically means life in prison. So we know with that count for Travis McMichael, that's probably be the rest of his life. For the rest of the felony murders with Gregory McMichael and William Roddie Bryan, we have to see what that's going to mean. But it looks like right now, the person who's on that video pulling the shotgun and shooting Ahmaud Arbery 3 times was found guilty by a jury of his peers of malice murder here in Glynn County in South Georgia.
Omar Villafranca, thank you for your reporting. And let's bring in legal analyst Joe Tamburino. Joe, decode the verdict for us and whether you think the case in Georgia has legal implications beyond that state.
Good afternoon. Yes, to decode the case is this, that the jury did not believe that they were acting under citizen arrest laws and they did not act in self-defense. And what to look forward to is this. There could be a profound impact countrywide on the issues of open carry of firearms and citizen arrest laws. Will states expand or restrict its citizens' ability to openly carry firearms in public? And will they adjust their citizen arrest laws like we had in Georgia in this case? Georgia repealed their law after this incident occurred. So we should look for developments in both those areas.
Joe Tamburino, thank you for your analysis. Our coverage continues on our 24-hour streaming service, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or download our CBS News app on your cell phone or connected TV. There will be more coverage on your local news. And tonight on the CBS Evening News, this has been a CBS News special report. I'm Catherine Herridge in Washington.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.
And you've been watching a CBS News special report. I'm Tanya Rivero. The verdict in the trial against the 3 men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery was read out in a Brunswick, Georgia courtroom just moments ago. All 3 defendants, Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, and William Bryan, were found guilty of murder in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor and professor at Loyola Law School, Jessica Levinson. Hi, Jessica. First off, what is your reaction to this verdict?
My reaction to the verdicts is that this is really a stinging rebuke, and I think appropriately so, given all the facts of the case of these 3 men who all contributed to the death, and in fact, we can now say murder, of Mr. Arbery. And I think what's important to remember is that this case was tried under a citizen's arrest law, under a self-defense law in Georgia that were favorable to defendants, that those laws have in fact been changed. So this really is a very important statement from the jury that given the facts of the case and given the law, again, that a lot of people viewed as a relic of a time that should be passed and is passed, where the law had built-in issues of racism, that they still found, with respect to the person who pulled the trigger, guilty on all counts charged. And with respect to the other two people, guilty on many of the very serious counts here.
Right, so let's dive into some of these separate counts. As you said, they are not all facing the same counts. Travis McMichael was the only one found guilty on all counts. He was the one who pulled the trigger. How will this, affect the sentencing for each individual defendant?
So Travis McMichael, I do not think we'll see the outside of a prison for the rest of his life. Given that he was found guilty of malice murder, felony murder, many other counts here, I don't think that there are many mitigating factors that a judge would look at. With respect to Gregory McMichael, guilty on everything but the most serious count. So what's going to happen? There will be serious time in prison. Now, he was a member of law enforcement before. He, I believe, was an investigator for the DA's office. I don't know if a judge is going to look at that and say, I think there's some mitigating factors here. But this is heavy jail time, even for William Bryan, the friend who was found not guilty of the two most serious charges. We're not talking about 1, 2, or 3 years behind bars here.
Right. And were you surprised that it did not take jurors all that long to deliberate, for this verdict? We've seen some other high-profile cases recently that the verdict has taken a lot longer. So were you surprised at the length of time?
No, and I'm going to say something that's just oddly human, considering the fact that we're talking about somebody's murder and we're talking about other people spending potentially the rest of their lives behind bars. Let's remember that Gregory McMichael is not a young man. He could spend the rest of his life behind bars here. The really strange and human thing is, it's Wednesday afternoon. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Juries tend to come back right before a holiday, or as we saw in the Rittenhouse case, I think just on Friday afternoon. This is something, it doesn't always happen, but I think a lot of people watching, it's not me, being clairvoyant here, a lot of people watching were ready for a verdict today. Now, look, of course, if the issues had been particularly challenging and the jury could not come to a conclusion, I'm not saying that the jury just, wanted to go home and they just all said, okay, guilty. But jurors are human and they feel the clock, and it's not unusual to get a verdict again right before a holiday, right before a weekend.
And so then will that also sort of speed up the sentencing? Is the judge expected to do that today? What happens next?
So, it was a little curious, honestly. The judge said, I'm releasing you, jurors. Now you are going back to the jury room and I'm going to talk to you. I don't expect, and I could be wrong in this case, I could be wrong that something's happening in Georgia, but typically the sentencing does not occur at that moment. You come back for sentencing, you have the judge reflect, you have both attorneys, both the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, separately submit sentencing memos. The prosecution will say, we should have the highest level for all of these reasons. The defense attorney can say, look, we have some mitigating factors here. This is a first time that this person has been in trouble. This person previously, for instance, with respect to Gregory, was a member of law enforcement. So that typically does not happen, at the same time. It's the guilt phase, and then it's the sentencing phase that happens later.
And looking at how this trial has played out and, reading the judge, do you think these men will receive the maximum sentences?
It's really hard to crystal ball this, but I think that, again, judges will defer to juries in the sense that the judge will realize that they were looking at this law, and I know I've emphasized this before, but this law that has largely been repealed when it comes to citizens arrest, this law that really has been changed when it comes to self-defense, and say that this is a jury who still found guilty on the vast majority of counts, and with respect to Travis, on all counts. And when it comes to Travis McMichael, this is life in prison as far as I can predict. Mm-hmm. When it comes to Gregory, because of his age, it could amount to life in prison. Sometimes you consider, again, the age. And when it comes to William, the friend, again, we're looking at, I would suspect, more than a decade in prison here. So I think the judge is going to take this very seriously. If you look at the way that the trial's been conducted, the evidence that's come forward, and again, the jury is the fact finder. The judge, unless there's something strange that happened, will defer to the jury's fact finding.
And is there anything beyond this that, Ahmaud Arbery's family can pursue for justice? For instance, can they take these men to any sort of civil court?
Yeah, so wrongful death suits are always available, or I shouldn't say always available, but would be available here. Of course, in this case, we don't know if there are deep pockets, but people can avail themselves both of, the criminal trial has now played out, and then we could also see a civil case. The thing to remember for a civil case, of course, is that you're not looking at imprisonment. The remedy would be money. In addition, what you're looking for is in a civil case is that it's a much lower burden of proof. So already having found the 3 defendants guilty on some very serious charges, for a wrongful death case, you would be looking at a lower burden of proof for the plaintiffs when it comes to winning those separate civil charges.
Right. And Jessica, let's pivot now to the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally trial, because the jury there could not come to a decision on 2 federal conspiracy charges. What are those charges exactly? What are they grappling with there?
They're grappling with the Ku Klux Klan Act that was passed almost about 150 years ago now in our country. And this is something I want to emphasize, we didn't used to talk about cases being brought under the Ku Klux Klan Act at all. And we didn't used to talk about these particular provisions of the Ku Klux Klan Act, which allow private individuals to sue other private individuals for deprivation of civil rights. Now, we have talked about the Ku Klux Klan Act, which is what we call this federal law, very recently, because some of the people involved in January 6th are being charged or sued under provisions of that law. So in this case, the jury just was not sure on those 2 federal charges. They couldn't come to a conclusion, but they were able to come to a conclusion on the state charges, on the state, for instance, conspiracy charges, state charges dealing with assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The jury, obviously we don't know why they couldn't come to a conclusion, but this is not kind of bread and butter for juries. This is an unfamiliar statute to most of us.
And talking about the Wisconsin parade attack suspect, Darrell E. Brooks, to pivot to yet another situation, he faces potentially 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Brooks has a significant criminal record. Does this case seem fairly cut and dry to you?
Looking at the video, obviously the facts here are not in dispute. The question, of course, will be, can you prove intentional homicide beyond a reasonable doubt? And while, as you correctly said, he has a criminal history, and in fact, I think just a few months ago was charged with using his vehicle as a weapon against a former girlfriend. Really, I think the big issue will be, can you show intent? Can you show the level of intent you need for intentional homicide? Let's not pretend that we didn't all see what we saw, which is purposefully using your car and driving it into a crowded parade of people. I don't want to prejudge this, but it's pretty easy to understand that when you use a vehicle and you drive into people, that you have formed the requisite intent.
Right. And so do you see that other charges could perhaps be brought, since more than 60 people were injured in the attack, and earlier police were saying they were going to wait as the investigation unfolded to see if more charges were warranted?
Absolutely. You could see other charges brought. Unfortunately, I think some of the reason that we wait, and this is of course hard to think about, is that you want to know if other people will pass away, or you want to know the full extent of the injuries to other people, and then you can add charges. There's no reason to think that this is the end of the charges. There is reason to think that, of course, these are the most serious charges that you could face given the circumstances, but It is not unusual that when it comes to a situation like this and there are multiple victims, unfortunately, the charges could change. Again, if somebody suffers more severe injuries or if somebody in fact passes away, then you could see another homicide charge.
All right, Jessica, before I let you go, I just want to ask you one last question related to the Ahmaud Arbery murder. Do you see that this verdict could perhaps have, implications for other cases across the country that have to do with open carry or that have to do with citizens' arrest, as you said, has already been amended there in Georgia? Do you think this case could affect other states?
Yeah, that's always the big question. I will say that I'm predisposed to think that we need to be careful about any one criminal case, one standing for more or trying to solve more than that case is intended to.
Right.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the Rittenhouse case over the last week, and we've seen very clearly, I think, that one criminal case shouldn't be asked to, solve all of society's ills. Is it, though, the case that I think other states could look at whether or not they have citizens arrest laws that are similar to Georgia's old law and reevaluate that? Yes, I think the time is right for that. Are there situations where other states could look and decide to reevaluate their self-defense laws? Potentially. When it comes to open carry, I think people typically feel the way they feel, and it's unlikely that this one verdict, I think, would create a radical change in that area.
Right. It is interesting, it is worth examining a little more closely from a legal perspective. When people get into an altercation of any kind and one person has a gun, that one person is the only one left alive after the altercation, and that person gets to craft the story, right? So in some ways, this case is not an example of that because the person with the gun has been found guilty of murder, but it is something that needs to be legally examined because a fight between two people when one has a gun is not a fair fight.
I think that's such an important point. And if you it depends on, I'll say the criminal law asks typically very narrow questions when it comes to self-defense. It's not, should this person have walked into the situation with a gun? Was it wise for them to have a gun? Or even in a lot of cases, did they legally have a gun? It's at that moment, even though they were the one to have the gun, somebody wouldn't have died if they didn't have it. At that moment, given the circumstances, would a reasonable person have acted in the same way? That's a much narrower issue than, frankly, I think society should ask. And yes, it is fair for us to look at our criminal laws and ask how subjective really they are and whether or not they could be made to protect more of us.
All right. Well, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your legal expertise.
Thank you.
Coming up in our next hour, President Biden heads into the holiday weekend optimistic about the economy as first-time unemployment claims drop to their lowest levels in decades. Plus, charges are likely against the suspect in the deadly Wisconsin parade crash after a sixth person dies. And airports and highways will be a little more crowded this Thanksgiving as travel numbers near pre-pandemic levels. Those stories and much more when we return. You're streaming CBSN.